Chris Hansen just documented the largest sting operation in TruBlu history. Let's talk about it. I'm Olivia Bennett. I'm a true crime journalist, and we have Chris Hansen with us here today. He's the co-founder of TruBlu and host of Takedown with Chris Hansen. I want to talk a little bit about why this most recent sting that you went on and documented with law enforcement stands out from other stings that you've done with TruBlu.
Well, it's interesting. It's the first one, first of all, Olivia, that we've done in the state of Louisiana, this time with the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office, Jason Ard and his team. They've been doing these for some time, and they're very professional, obviously. And it was really a great experience to be embedded with them. And one of the things that stands out about it is the sheer number of predators caught. In 3 days, we saw 11 men show up trying to exploit a child sexually, three of whom were in this country illegally, and one of them, a fourth one, was actually in the New Orleans Police Academy for a time before washing out, resigning. And here's a guy who was engaging in this very bizarre master slave uh, relationship conversation, trying to coerce a 14-year-old girl to come to New Orleans from Livingston Parish, which is closer to Baton Rouge. He offered to send and did send four different Ubers to try to get who he thought was a 14-year-old girl brought to his home.
That is very interesting to hear about. And I understand that you have gone and documented stings on different shows before, To Catch a Predator, Hansen versus Predator. And I know that in some of those scenarios, you have caught more predators than 11. How many predators have you caught or has law enforcement caught in one sting that you've documented?
Well, over 20 years, we've seen investigations, Olivia, where a handful have showed up, and we've seen as many as 51 show up in Riverside County, California. Back when a lot of this activity was confined to two or three different chat rooms on different platforms, AOL and Yahoo specifically. As time has gone on, the number of platforms upon which this activity can take place has literally exploded. So you see much more of this activity, but it's happening in a more diffuse way, a way that's more difficult to detect and catch these guys. So there's more activity than ever before, but it's harder to find the guys because there's so many places where they can operate in secrecy.
So, Chris, I understand that you have an appearance on a major network coming up. Can you tell me what that is?
We're going to be on Jesse Waters' show tonight on Fox News, an appearance that we do frequently to share some of the results of our investigation. And so we'll be talking to Jesse Waters tonight, 8:30 Eastern time or thereabouts, and you'll be able to see a preview of these investigations that ultimately will be on TruBlu.
And are these the most recent investigations that you've done?
Yes, these ones we did last week in Livingston Parish,
Okay.
Louisiana.
So I do want to talk about those a little bit. As far as I understand, we are going to be having episodes coming out soon, so you might want to save some information. But if you want to give us a little bit of information about who you caught, who law enforcement caught, and what you documented while you were there.
Well, each one of these cases is fascinating in and of themselves. As I mentioned, we had three men show up who were in this country illegally, which, raises the question about the security of our borders in this country and how we're letting these people in and who we're letting in and what they're doing here. And are we doing enough to find criminals who shouldn't be in this country in the first place? So those three cases highlight that very important issue. And we'll be talking about that in the actual stories on TruBlu. The former police academy guy who went on in great detail after his arrest to tell me how he engages in this master slave scenario that is frightening and horrifying to think that he would try to engage a 14-year-old girl in this. And then we had other guys from all walks of life. We had a guy who worked in a restaurant. We had a guy who managed a store. We had guys who really thought that they were going to exploit a child. And it's disturbing to see how often this goes on all over the country. And I think it sheds a light on you know everywhere we go that this is an issue that is very disturbing, and one that has to be addressed by parents with their kids, because that is, at the end of the day, the first line of defense.
So, Chris, I do want to talk a little bit about something specific that you mentioned just because it stood out to me. You mentioned the man from the police academy and the master slave scenario, which is particularly frightening to hear about. Have you ever seen anything like this before on a sting?
Well, we've seen a lot of frightening scenarios, Olivia. This one particularly disturbing because he knew that the girl was underage. He had first tried to tell me in the interview that, it's all pretend, it was role playing, that it was probably an adult pretending to be 14. And then I confronted him with the fact that one of the Uber drivers, and we had gotten the Uber driver to cooperate in our investigation, and she had come up to the Sting House, and she actually called him and said, "Look, I can't transport this girl because she's underage. She's too young. I can't take her that far away." So he knew, because of what the Uber driver said, that this was a child, even though it was a decoy with the sheriff's office posing as a child. He knew that he was going to bring a 14-year-old girl to his home in New Orleans. And so the question begs, what happens to this girl once she gets there if there's a real girl? Does she just get sexually exploited? Does she end up getting harmed? Does he try to cover the evidence? This guy's got police experience. He was confronted after shoplifting at a Target store when he was in the police academy and given the choice of being fired or resigning, and he stepped down. But it's really disturbing to think that a guy like this could think he could become a police officer. And what if he had? And then he's got all this power and authority. It's very frightening.
It sounds very frightening. And Chris, throughout your predator investigations that you've been involved in, you've kind of coined the term chat is chat, but showing up is showing up. And I do want to ask a question about that. I understand that this time you've caught 11 predators, but how often do you talk to many people and no one shows up? And what percentage of people usually do actually make it out of the chat into a sting house?
I would say it's probably 30% of the chatters actually show up as well. Thankfully, a lot of the people who chat, gain a conscience or decide, realize that it's a bad idea to try to consummate. Some people are online just to fulfill a fantasy and don't show up. But I would say approximately 30% of the people do show up. And occasionally we have a day where nobody shows up. And then we have a day where five people show up. So it's really hard to tell. Each investigation takes on its own rhythm.
So, the FBI has said in the past that 500,000 predators are active online every day. And of course, that was in the past. There's always potential that that number has grown. How does it feel to know, from a deterrent standpoint, that your work exposing these predator investigations may help to cut down on those numbers?
Well, I think at the end of the day, what we accomplish with these investigations is awareness and a dialogue. And I think it's important. And the more that we can understand how a predator's mind works through, our interviews with them, the better we can understand how to protect ourselves. So as long as people are paying attention and watching these shows and having these discussions with their kids and nieces and nephews, I think it's a positive thing. And I think there is a deterrent factor. I think people who have seen this show have decided to go get help for their problem. And that's another step forward to, preventing a child from being exploited.
So, Chris, I want to ask you one more question before I let you go today. One thing that I think a lot of people wonder is why? Why people show up? And I am curious to know if law enforcement has given you a reason for why this sting in particular had such a high turnout rate.
Well, I don't think you actually know. I think it may have something to do with the fact that they haven't done as many there as have been done in other areas of the country. I do think that this particular team has done a great job in terms of, having their decoys out in the chat rooms and being available to see who might be interested in this sort of activity or commit these sort of crimes. You just never know. We can have an investigation where at one night five, six guys show up. We can have an investigation where there's a night where nobody shows up. And quite honestly, you could argue that when nobody shows up, that's a win. That's because we've had a deterrent effect. So, we joke sometimes that it might be fun to go do a cooking show at some point when nobody ever shows up. Sadly, I don't think we're ever going to see that day, but it might be might be a sign of success.
Thank you so much for joining us here today, Chris. And as always, you can subscribe to TruBlu for more takedown content and other true crime programming. Make sure to follow TruBlu on all platforms. You can watch at watchtrueblue.com, and make sure to follow Crime with Olivia for more crime news updates. Stay safe.